Welcome to Fides Wealth Strategies Group Financial Moment. We have Dr. Chris Rand.
And Mr. Markello.
And we're here today to talk to you about financial planning. Financial planning, I think, is one of those things that everybody likes to talk about, but no one understands all the different things that are involved on becoming and working with a financial planner.
Okay.
There are, we consider to be 6 core areas of financial planning, sometimes wrapping in a 7th. So let's talk about the core 6 today.
Okay.
And the core 6 really are centered around financial position, protection planning, investment planning, tax planning, retirement planning, and then estate planning. So a lot of planning's in there.
Yeah.
But I thought we can get into a little bit of each one just to give everybody an understanding of how that all comes together. When we start talking about financial position, a lot of times we're just talking about what do you do with your cash? Yeah. Right? At the end of the day, how do you handle it? Where do you put it? Cash management and budgeting, the nasty B word.
Yeah.
I've learned over time that until you really take a seat and look at where your money's going, it's very difficult to understand what you're going to need going down the road.
Yeah, cash is king, as they say, right? So it's all about cash flow. How much cash do you have? And when we say cash, we don't literally mean cash greenbacks. We're talking about how much money is coming in and then how much money is going out on an annual basis. Yeah. So do you have positive cash flow each year or do you have negative cash flow each year?
I'm positive about cash flow.
Yeah, I know you're positive that it's important.
Yeah, it's important.
But we're supposed to be looking for positive cash flow.
Absolutely,
so,
it is.
And if you don't have positive cash flow, that's one of the biggest challenges in the first position you probably need to work on is how do I rectify that?
Yeah, absolutely. And once you understand where the money's going, I think that it's important that we start talking about things like cash reserves. Cash reserves are important. Now, cash reserves can be held in a myriad of different places. I think that obviously your checking and savings is a great place, but you also have things like money market accounts. You've got even brokerage accounts that have access to it in a very short period of time. Could be considered cash reserves. How much do you think you should generally have in cash reserves?
So most financial planners, I think, would say 3 to 6 months of spending. And then there are some people, and I believe anyway, that should be even 6 to 12 months of spending. And that might be a business owner, that might be someone who owns a lot of rental properties. Basically, your likelihood to have to dip into your cash reserves, if it's a lot higher, you probably want that to be a larger number.
Absolutely.
So let's say you spend $10,000 a month, then your reserve should be somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000.
Right. And now that can be in a tiered money market, savings, checking, things of that nature.
Yeah, the reality is we used to talk about that when we had good interest rates, right? I mean, you would tier out your savings and money markets because you got slightly better interest rates on a savings account and slightly better on a money market account. Yeah. But unfortunately, for almost a decade now, interest rates have been just so low, it may not be worth the hassle factor of trying to tier it out.
Absolutely. So the next factor and the second tier, the pillar of the Fides process really gets down to protection planning. Yeah. Now, protection planning is everything from life insurance to disability income insurance, goes into liability coverages, and then really even like long-term care.
Yeah, basically, what could possibly really derail your financial plan? Something that you just can't imagine. You want to protect against it. It's those uncommon situations.
Risk management.
It's risk management at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Premature death, and I always chuckle a little bit because I always think death is always premature. Yeah. But premature above and beyond what the likelihood age is. Yeah. Death and disability are probably the biggest ones that most people talk about. But to your point, long-term care is important. And then, of course, auto and homeowners insurance are important. Yeah. State of California, it depends on the state that you're in, but California, where we are, requires that you have a certain amount of auto insurance. By the way, that's not enough for most clients, but it's the minimum you're required to have that to drive a car. Most mortgage companies, if not all, require you to have homeowners insurance. Yeah. So it's common for people to have auto and homeowners insurance, I would say. Yeah. But a little less common is the life, disability, and long-term care.
Absolutely. The third pillar in the Fides process, we really get into things like investment planning, right? Investment planning gets into asset allocation. I think that's an important one to discuss, right? We talk about you get into stocks and bonds, and you get into cash and real estate. Those are important matrices to look at. But you also have to worry about your risk tolerance. Risk tolerance is how much risk can you handle versus the amount of reward you're willing to go after, right? And so those are important things to look at and make certain it's right for you and who you are.
People always want to take the most amount of risk possible until we have a bad market.
Of course.
And so really evaluating risk tolerance is trying to figure out how are you likely to react when we go through a rough market. Yeah. If your portfolio drops 10 or 20, or 30%,
okay.
What are you likely to do? Are you likely to, I mean, obviously everyone's going to be concerned, but are you likely to sell your assets? Are you likely to look at that as an opportunity and invest more? Are you likely to be concerned, but stay status quo and hold in there? And those questions, answering those questions and getting a good grip on how you will react really helps you figure out what your risk profile should be.
Yeah, if you're going to be like Warren Buffett, where the market's falling apart and he's adding more money, that's going to invest differently than somebody that's in their 70s or 80s that are really concerned about losing out on everything.
Yeah, losing principal and it not coming back.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another area in investment planning you always talk about is the different tax positions you can have, right? Tax allocation as well.
Yeah.
Whether it's going to be in retirement accounts, whether it's going to be in after-tax accounts, or even in Roth.
Roth accounts, yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The fourth pillar in the Fides process really is tax planning, right? And so when you get into tax planning, are you doing the proper withholdings?
Yep.
That's a big one, right?
You don't want a big tax bill come April 15th, right?
Right.
Are you withholding enough money? Are you paying the right amount of tax over your lifetime? And that's a really, really hard concept, I think, for most people to think about. We always want to pay the least amount of tax today.
Yep.
Might not be the best strategy over 30 years. Maybe you should pay a little more today so you can pay a lot less later.
That's a good one. That is a good one. Also, things about like, what are the effects of liquidating assets? When you're retired or pre-retired, if you take money out of IRAs or if you're selling stocks that are highly appreciated, you have to be very cognizant of that when doing those type of scenarios. So that's a big one. The fifth pillar in the Fides process really gets down to retirement planning.
Or I would just say goal planning in general. It could be education planning, could be other goals that you may have, but pretty much for everybody, financial independence and retirement is important.
Financial, and some of the key questions that people ask is, when can I? That's a big one, right? And it might necessarily be when they're going to, but it's when can I be financially independent? When can I go to work on my terms, not my boss's terms? That's a big one. When do I take Social Security is always a big conversation.
Sure.
How can I maximize my Social Security benefit? And then when do I take my RMDs? When do I take my distributions for my IRAs?
My requirement of distributions.
Yeah. Or how do I take it? Yeah. Can I stretch them out? You name it. What are my options in that scenario?
Or might even be how, and this ties into investments and retirement. And what you'll find, or we find, is a lot of the different areas do actually overlap as we're coming up with a recommendation. But you might say, okay, well, now I'm financially independent. How am I going to get my money when I retire? Where is it going to come from?
Right.
And so that ties into taxes, that ties into investments, and then that ties into the retirement planning section as well.
All right, and the last pillar in the Fides process gets into estate planning, which I know is near and dear to your heart. You always love getting into estate planning topics, but do I need a trust is always a great question. Yeah. Another one is, what kind of trust should I have?
Yeah. Do I need a will?
Yeah. Do I need a will?
Powers of attorney?
Exactly. And those are all questions that I think when you're going through the planning process, it's important that these things are touched upon. Yeah. Are the assets owned differently? Are they owned correctly? That's always a big one, right? You own a home, but you didn't add it to the trust.
Yep.
Well, guess what?
Yeah.
That piece of asset is still subject to probate.
It is. Asset transfer when you get married and community property versus separate property estates. There's a lot of things that everybody needs estate planning.
Yeah. Not
everybody needs a trust.
Right.
Not everybody needs a will per se, but everybody needs estate planning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Estate planning is much more than buying a will or a trust. While that might be part of the estate planning process, everybody needs to look at ownership, to your point, needs to look at beneficiary designations, and needs to think about if something happens to me, death or divorce, what would the outcome be from an estate planning standpoint?
Absolutely. Well, this will wrap up and conclude another Fides Wealth Strategies Group financial moment. We'll talk to you again soon.